Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, MR.Creepy N. So today's video is definitely going to creep you out. In this video, we're getting into real experiences from people working the graveyard shift when things went terribly wrong. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Alright, let's get into tonight's stories. My name is Aaron, and I worked night security at a self-storage facility for about 9 months. The shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and for the most part, it was the easiest job I'd ever had. The property had about 200 units spread across 3 buildings, all accessible by keypad codes that logged every entry. My job was basically to sit in the office, watch the cameras, and do a walking patrol every 2 hours. The facility was in a quiet area just outside the city. During the day, people came and went constantly, but at night, the place was a ghost town. In my first 8 months there, I think I saw maybe 5 people access their units after midnight, and they were always in and out within 20 minutes. Everything changed one night in late October. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was halfway through my patrol of Building B when I noticed Unit 47 was open. Not just unlocked, but wide open, with the roll-up door pulled all the way to the ceiling. The interior light was on, which was strange because most units didn't have electricity. I walked closer and called out. No response. I stepped up to the entrance and looked inside. The unit was maybe 10 by 10 feet, completely empty, except for a folding chair in the center facing the back wall. On the chair was a leather jacket. That was it. No boxes, no furniture, nothing else. I checked my log. The unit had been accessed at 1:14 a.m. by the renter, someone named Maurice Holt. The system showed he was still inside, meaning he'd entered but hadn't exited through the main gate yet. But he clearly wasn't in this unit. I radioed my supervisor, but he didn't pick up. He almost never did during night shifts. I decided to close the unit and continue my patrol. I pulled the door down and locked it manually, then moved on to the rest of the building. About 20 minutes later, I was back in the office reviewing the camera footage. I scrubbed back to 1:14 a.m. and watched the entrance camera. A man in a dark coat and baseball cap had driven in, parked near Building B, and walked toward the units. The camera angle didn't capture which unit he entered, but the timestamp matched. Then I checked the exit log. Maurice Holt had logged out at 1052 a.m., right around the time I was finishing my patrol. I rewound the exit camera footage. Same car, same man. He left without incident. But here's what bothered me. If he left at 1:52 and I found the unit open at 1:30, that meant he'd left it wide open for at least 20 minutes before I closed it. And if he'd been in there when I arrived, why didn't he respond when I called out? The next night, I came in for my shift and checked the access log out of curiosity. Maurice Holt had accessed Unit 47 again at 1:11 a.m., just a few minutes before I started my first patrol. I grabbed my flashlight and headed straight to Building B. Unit 47 was open again. Same setup. Empty room. Folding chair in the center. Leather jacket draped over the back. But this time, there was something else. A small digital camera was sitting on the floor in the far corner. Lens pointed at the chair. The record light was on. I bent down to look at it, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, and Maurice Holt was standing just outside the unit, maybe 6 feet away. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a thin face and tired eyes. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. I asked him what he was doing. He didn't answer. I asked if this was his unit. He nodded slowly. I told him he couldn't leave it open like this, that it was against policy. He nodded again, then stepped forward, walked past me into the unit, picked up the camera, and turned it off. He put it in his coat pocket, grabbed the jacket off the chair, and folded the chair in one smooth motion. Then he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry you saw that." I asked him what he meant, but he just walked out. I followed him to his car and watched him drive away. When I checked the log later, it showed he'd exited at 2:03 a.m. I reported the incident to my supervisor the next day. He pulled the rental agreement for Unit 47. Maurice Holt had rented it 3 months earlier and paid 6 months in advance. The contact number on file was disconnected. The address was a vacant lot. Maurice never came back after that night. But a week later, I was going through the lost and found a USB drive that someone had left in the office Dropbox. There was no note, no label. I plugged it into my computer. It contained about 40 video files, all titled with dates and times. I opened one at random. It showed the interior of Unit 47, the folding chair, the jacket. The camera was stationary, recording from the corner. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then Maurice walked into frame, sat in the chair, and stared directly at the camera. He sat there for 11 minutes without moving. Then he stood up, walked out of frame, and the video ended. I opened another file. Same thing. He sat, stared, and left. Every video was identical. I checked the dates. They went back almost 2 months, 2 or 3 recordings per week, always between 1 and 3 a.m. I never told my supervisor about the USB drive. I deleted the files and threw it away. I worked at that facility for another 2 months before I quit. I never saw Maurice Holt again, but I also never stopped thinking about those videos or what he was doing in that empty room in the middle of the night, just sitting and staring at nothing. My name is Nicole, and 3 years ago, I worked the night audit shift at a mid-sized hotel downtown. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and during those hours, I was the only front desk staff on duty. My responsibilities included checking in late arrivals, processing the day's transactions, and answering the switchboard if any guests called down. The hotel had 120 rooms across 8 floors. We weren't fancy, but we were clean and affordable, so we stayed busy with business travelers and tourists. Most nights were uneventful. I'd check in maybe 2 or 3 late arrivals, run my reports, and spend the rest of the shift watching Netflix on my phone. The problem started in early March. I came in from my shift and found a note from the evening supervisor saying that room 319 had complained about repeated hang-up calls to their room around 2 a.m. She checked the phone logs and found nothing. No internal or external calls had been placed to that room during the night. I didn't think much of it. Phone systems glitch sometimes. But 2 nights later, I got a call at the desk around 1:45 a.m. I picked up and said my greeting. There was silence on the other end. Then a click. The caller ID showed it came from room 554. I called back to make sure everything was okay. A man answered, groggy and annoyed. He said he hadn't called the desk and had been asleep for hours. Over the next week, it happened 4 more times, always between 1:30 and 3 a.m., always from occupied rooms. Always silence followed by a hang-up. When I called back, the guests were either asleep or insisted they hadn't touched the phone. I started keeping a log. Room 217, room 402, room 635. Different rooms, different guests, same pattern. Then one night I answered a call from room 288 at 2:17 a.m. This time, instead of silence, I heard breathing. It was faint but deliberate, like someone was holding the phone close to their mouth. I asked if they needed assistance. The breathing continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. The line went dead. I immediately called room 288. A woman answered, wide awake this time. She said she'd just woken up to use the bathroom and hadn't made any calls. But then she said something that made my stomach turn. She asked if I'd been in the hallway earlier, because she'd heard footsteps outside her door around 2 a.m., and when she looked through the peephole, she saw someone standing there in a hotel uniform. I told her it wasn't me, that I'd been at the desk the entire night. She went quiet for a moment, then said the person had walked away toward the stairwell. I told her I'd send someone up to check, but we both knew I was alone. I assured her I'd review the security footage and asked her to lock her deadbolt. After we hung up, I pulled up the camera feed for the second floor. We had cameras at each elevator bank and stairwell entrance, but not in the hallways themselves. I scrubbed through the footage from 1:45 to 2:30 a.m. Nothing. No one entered or exited the second floor during that time. I should have called the police then, but I didn't. I convinced myself the guest had been half asleep and confused. But the calls didn't stop, they got worse. 3 nights later, I answered a call from room 42012 at 2003 a.m. Again breathing, but this time, after about 5 seconds, a voice whispered, "Front desk," It was flat and emotionless, barely audible. I asked who was calling. The voice repeated, "Front desk," in the exact same tone. Then it hung up. I was shaking when I called the room back. No answer. I let it ring 15 times. Nothing. I checked the guest registration. Room 42012 was occupied by a couple from Ohio. Checked in that afternoon. I grabbed the master key and took the elevator to the 4th floor. When I reached room 412, I knocked and identified myself. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I used the key and opened the door slowly, calling out as I entered. The room was empty. The bed was made. The bathroom was clean. There was no luggage, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone had stayed there. I checked the closet and under the bed. Nothing. I went back down to the desk and pulled up the registration. The couple had checked in at 3:47 p.m. and paid for one night with a credit card. I called the number on file. It rang twice. Then a recorded message said the number was no longer in service. I ran the credit card through our system again. Declined. I checked the door log. Room 412's keycard had been used to enter the room at 4 Turstrud 2 p.m. and hadn't been used since, but someone had called from that room's phone less than 20 minutes ago. I started going through the previous calls I'd logged. Room 319, room 554, room 217. I cross-referenced them with the check-in records. Every single room that had called the desk, with silence or breathing, had been registered to guests with disconnected phone numbers and declined credit cards, and every time I'd called those rooms back, the guests who answered were different people, legitimate guests who checked in hours later. Someone had been checking into rooms under fake names, staying just long enough to make the calls, then leaving before I could verify anything. But the cameras never showed anyone, and the door logs only recorded one entry per room. The final incident happened 5 nights later. I was at the desk at 2:34 a.m. when the switchboard lit up. 12 calls, all at once, from 12 different rooms. I stared at the board, my hand hovering over the phone. Then, one by one, they disconnected. 12 hang-ups in perfect sequence, starting from room 103 and ending with room 847. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't call them back. I sat there until 7 a.m., watching the cameras, waiting for my replacement. When she arrived, I handed her my notes and told her I was putting in my 2 weeks. The hotel brought in a technician to inspect the phone system. He found nothing wrong. Management reviewed all the footage I'd flagged. They saw nothing. They told me it was probably a software glitch, that old hotel phone systems do strange things sometimes. But I know what I heard. I know those rooms were empty when they called. And I know that whoever was making those calls knew exactly when I was alone and exactly which rooms to use. I still work night shifts, but never at a hotel. I can't stand the sound of a ringing phone anymore. My name is Marcus, and I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town for about a year and a half. The hours were midnight to 8 a.m. and most nights I was completely alone. The station sat at the intersection of 2 county roads, surrounded by farmland on 3 sides and a stretch of woods on the 4th. During the day, we got decent traffic. At night, I'd see maybe 10 customers total. The job was simple. Ring up gas and cigarettes, keep the coffee fresh, restock the coolers, and try not to fall asleep. I'd usually get through a whole season of whatever show I was watching in a week. The isolation didn't bother me. I'm not really a people person anyway, and the pay was decent enough for what I was doing. I started noticing him around my 3rd month. He'd come in every Friday night, always between 2:30 and 3 a.m., always alone. He was maybe in his 50s, average height, always wore the same navy blue jacket and work boots. He'd buy a pack of Marlboro Reds, a black coffee, and a lottery ticket. Same order every time. He never made small talk, never smiled, just paid in cash and left. At first, I appreciated the consistency. Working nights, you start to recognize the regulars, and there's something comforting about the routine. But after a few weeks, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. He never pumped gas. His car, an older grey sedan, would be parked at the far end of the lot near the air pump. But he never filled the tank. He'd just come in, make his purchase, and drive away. One night in June, I decided to check the security footage after he left. I wanted to see where he was coming from, what direction he'd approached from. I rewound the exterior camera to 2:15 a.m. and watched. At 2:41, his car appeared in frame, but it didn't pull in from either road. It was just there, already parked, like it had been sitting in the lot the entire time with its lights off. That bothered me more than it should have. I told myself maybe I'd missed him pulling in while I was in the back room or restocking, but I started paying closer attention. The next Friday, I made sure to watch the lot from 2 a.m. onward. At 2:38, I glanced down to grab a box of straws from under the counter. When I looked back up, his car was there. I hadn't heard an engine. I hadn't seen headlights. It was just parked in the same spot, and he was already walking toward the door. He came in, bought his cigarettes, coffee, and lottery ticket, and left without a word. I watched him through a window as he got in his car. He sat there for a moment, not starting the engine, just staring straight ahead through the windshield. Then he drove off toward the south road. I checked the footage again that night. Same thing, no approach. The car just appeared in frame, already parked. I scrubbed backward for 20 minutes before his arrival. Nothing. The lot was empty, and then it wasn't. I started dreading Fridays. I didn't tell anyone about it because I knew how it sounded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with this guy. The way he never spoke, never made eye contact, the way his car seemed to materialize instead of arrive. It felt like a routine, but not a human one. Then one Friday in late July, he didn't show up. I waited until 3:30 a.m., watching the lot, expecting his car to appear at any moment. It never did. I felt relieved and anxious at the same time. The next Friday, he didn't come either, or the Friday after that. 3 weeks passed. I started to think maybe he'd moved away or changed his routine. But then, on a Tuesday night in August, he came back, not at 2:30 a.m. like usual, at 4:47 a.m., right as I was starting to close out the register for the morning shift change. The door chimed, and I looked up. He was standing just inside the entrance, staring at me. He didn't walk to the counter. He didn't move at all. He just stood there in his navy jacket and work boots, hands at his sides, face completely blank. I asked if he needed help. He didn't respond. I asked again, louder this time. Nothing. He just kept staring, his eyes locked on mine. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I reached for my phone under the counter, ready to call the police, and that's when he finally spoke. He said, "You've been watching me." His voice was flat, barely louder than a whisper. I told him I didn't know what he meant, that I was just doing my job. He took a step closer, and I backed up against the cigarette display behind me. He said it again, the exact same way. "You've been watching me." I told him he needed to leave. He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused, then turned and walked out. I watched him get in his car and drive away, this time toward the north road, the opposite direction he always took. I quit 2 days later. I didn't give notice, didn't explain why. I just told my manager I couldn't do nights anymore and stopped showing up. A friend of mine who still works there told me the guy never came back after that Tuesday. No one matching his description has been in since. But a few weeks after I quit, I was going through my phone and found something I don't remember taking. It was a photo of the gas station parking lot at night, taken from the exterior camera feed. In the corner of the frame, partially hidden by the air pump, was his gray sedan, and standing next to the driver's side door, staring directly at the camera, was him. The timestamp on the photo said it was taken at 2:34 a.m. on a Friday in May. I never downloaded footage from the security system. I never even had access to download footage, but somehow that image was on my phone. I deleted it immediately, but I still remember it perfectly. The way he was standing, the way he was looking at the camera, like he knew I'd see it eventually. I don't work night shifts anymore. My name is David, and I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 15 years. I've driven every major highway in the continental US, logged over 2 million miles and seen just about everything you can see from behind a windshield. I've driven through blizzards, dust storms, and fog so thick I couldn't see the hood of my own truck. I've had close calls with drunk drivers, blown tires at 70 miles per hour, and brake failures on mountain passes, but nothing prepared me for what happened on Interstate 80 in Nebraska last September. I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Ohio to Sacramento, a route I'd driven dozens of times before. It was a Tuesday night, just after 1 a.m., and I was somewhere between Lincoln and North Platte. The highway was almost empty. I hadn't passed another vehicle in 20 minutes, and my CB radio had been silent for over an hour. That's normal for that stretch. It's flat, dark, and desolate, the kind of road where you can drive for an hour and feel like you haven't moved at all. I was about 6 hours into my shifts when I noticed headlights in my passenger side mirror. Another truck, maybe a quarter-mile back, matching my speed. I didn't think much of it. Truckers tend to convoy up on empty highways. It's safer that way, and it breaks up the monotony. I kept my speed steady at 65 and watched the lights hold their position behind me. After about 10 minutes, the truck started closing the gap. I could see it clearly now in my mirrors. A standard 18-wheeler with a dark cab and an unmarked trailer. No company logos, no running lights except the required dot minimums. It pulled into the left lane and started to pass me, which was normal enough, but as it drew alongside my cab, it didn't complete the pass. It just stayed there, matching my speed exactly, the driver's window maybe 15 feet from mine. I glanced over, trying to get a look at who was driving, but the cab was dark. I couldn't see anyone inside. I tapped my brakes slightly to let him pass. He slowed down with me. I sped up a bit. He sped up too, staying perfectly parallel. This went on for almost 2 minutes. I started to get irritated. I flashed my lights at him, the universal signal to either pass or fall back. Nothing. He just held his position. I reached for my CB and called out on channel 19, asking if the driver next to me had his radio on. Static. No response. Then I saw his right turn signal come on. He was indicating he wanted to merge into my lane, which made no sense because I was already there. I laid on my horn, a long blast to warn him off. He kept coming. Slowly, steadily, his trailer started drifting into my lane. I had two choices, hit the brakes hard or swerve onto the shoulder. I chose the shoulder. My rig shook as the right wheels hit gravel, and I fought to keep control. The other truck completed his merge and settled into my lane, right where I'd been a second earlier. Then he slowed down, forcing me to either brake harder or try to pass him. I got back on the highway and pulled into the left lane, my hand shaking on the wheel. I accelerated to get around him, and as I passed, I looked into his cab again. Still dark, still no sign of a driver, but as I cleared his front bumper, his high beams flashed on, flooding my cab with light. Then he accelerated and tucked in behind me, close enough that I couldn't see his headlights in my mirror, only the glare reflecting off my trailer. He was tailgating me at 70 miles per hour. I could feel the pressure of his presence, the way another vehicle that close messes with your air drag. I sped up to 75. He stayed on me. I tried the CB again, this time on channel 9, the emergency channel. Anyone out there copy? I've got a truck on my ass and he's not backing off. Nothing, just static. Then my CB crackled and a voice came through. It was distorted, choppy, like the signal was breaking up. It said, exit 312, 2 miles. I checked my GPS. Exit 312 was a rest area, barely more than a parking lot, and a couple of picnic tables. The voice came through again, clearer this time. Exit 312, get off. I didn't recognize the voice, but it didn't matter. I needed to get away from this truck. I put on my turn signal and started to merge right. The truck behind me matched my move, staying inches from my rear bumper. We were both in the right lane now, and the exit was coming up fast. At the last possible second, I cranked the wheel and took the exit ramp hard, my trailer swaying as I decelerated too quickly. The other truck didn't follow. I watched in my mirror as it blew past the exit and disappeared down the highway. I pulled into the rest area and stopped in the first parking space I saw, my engine still running, my hands still gripping the wheel. I sat there for a full minute, trying to catch my breath. The rest area was empty. No other vehicles, no lights except for a single flickering lamp near the bathrooms. I shut off the engine and grabbed my phone. No signal. I tried the CB again. Dead air. I got out of the cab, and walked around my truck, checking for damage. Everything looked fine. Then I walked to the rear of my trailer and stopped. Scraped into the paint, just above the bumper, were 4 words in jagged, uneven letters. "You should have stopped." I didn't see who wrote it. I didn't hear them do it, but it was fresh. The metal underneath was bright and exposed, like it had been scratched within the last few minutes. I got back in my truck, started the engine, and got back on the highway. I drove straight through to Sacramento without stopping again, not even for fuel. When I delivered my load, I had the trailer repainted before I took another job. I still drive I-80. I still work nights, but I don't convoy up anymore. If I see headlights behind me on an empty highway, I take the next exit and wait until they're gone. And I never, ever ignore my CB when someone tells me to get off the road.